This video will help you to understand your basic rights as a tenant and the rights of your landlord. Landlord-tenant laws change county by county, so this video is only meant to provide general information. Before you take any action or rely on any information in this video, it is highly recommended that you consult an attorney or contact legal aid. What is a lease? Your lease is a written or oral agreement between you and your landlord. Your lease lays out the basic rights and responsibilities of both you and your landlord. Most importantly, the lease gives you the right to occupy the rented property. This right is important because you, the tenant, have the right to total possession of the property. It gives you the right to keep other people, including your landlord, off of the property. Your lease will also state the amount of rent that you must pay to the landlord and the date on which your rent is due. When it is time for you to sign a lease, your landlord will probably give you one that he has already written. Reading and understanding your lease is the first step to knowing your rights as a tenant. If you don't understand parts of the lease, you should have someone else look at it or ask the landlord to explain. And don't be afraid to ask your landlord to make changes. Your main responsibility as a tenant is to pay your rent and to pay it on time. Some landlords give tenants a grace period to pay the rent after its due date before considering it late. Once your rent is late, many landlords charge late fees. You are then responsible for paying both the rent and the late fees to the landlord. You should always get a receipt from your landlord when you pay your rent and keep the receipts at least until you no longer live there. If you fail to pay your rent on time, your landlord may evict you. To learn more about the eviction process, please see the other video in this series titled Evictions and Security Deposits. Another responsibility you have as a tenant is to keep the residence in a livable condition. This means that you should remove trash and waste, not destroy or damage the property, not disturb other residents, and cut the grass or do yard work if it is required by your lease. If you violate any of your tenant responsibilities, your landlord must provide you with time to fix your violation. Tenants have 14 days to fix most violations, but only 7 days to pay rent if rent is the violation. Violations can ultimately cause your landlord to evict you. It is important to note that landlords may have more responsibilities that are not discussed in this video. If you feel your landlord is trying to avoid his legal responsibility, you should consult an attorney or the Legal Aid Society. The major and common responsibilities of landlords are discussed in this segment. First, the landlord must follow all building and housing codes and keep the residence in such a condition. There are many codes landlords are required to follow. If you feel that your landlord is not following these codes, you can contact the Department of Licensing and Inspections by dialing 311 from your phone. An inspector will come out and notify the landlord of any code violations. However, calling a code inspector should be considered a last resort because calling an inspector could anger your landlord and start a difficult relationship. If you do decide to call an inspector, it is probably a good idea to let your landlord know ahead of time. In addition to following building and housing codes, the landlord must keep the residence in a livable condition. This does not require the landlord to maintain luxury items, but it does require him to maintain the basic necessities, such as a toilet or bath. The landlord must also maintain all facilities that he provides to tenants. This includes things such as air conditioning, electrical systems, elevators, and appliances. As part of maintaining the residence in a livable manner, landlords must provide essential services. These include running water, hot water, electricity, and heat. Landlords are not required to provide air conditioning, but if they do provide it, they're required to maintain it. A landlord has not violated his responsibilities if any of these services are disconnected because the tenant failed to pay their own utility bill. If your landlord does not meet his responsibilities, you should give him written notice of what he has failed to do. You should keep a copy of any notice you give the landlord or any notice that he gives you, because they may become important later, especially if you have to go to eviction court. If you feel the violations are severe enough that you want to terminate your lease, you should talk with a lawyer or legal aid because there could be serious consequences. If you go ahead with terminating your lease, there are several requirements. First, you must give the landlord written notice to fix the violations within 14 days of the notice. If the landlord does not fix his violations within 14 days, the lease will end 30 days from when the landlord was given the notice. Both of these statements must be in the written notice that you give the landlord. An alternative to ending your lease is something called repair and deduct. What repair and deduct means is that you first get permission from the landlord to make a repair yourself. You make the repair, then you take away the amount the repair costs you from your rent payment. But the cost of the repair cannot be more than 1/2 of your monthly rent. So if your monthly rent is $400, the repair cannot be more than $200. When deciding to repair and deduct, you should first talk to an attorney or contact legal aid. Remember, anytime you don't pay the full amount of your rent, you could face serious consequences and even eviction. A third option is to find somewhere else to live until your landlord makes the repairs. If you do find alternative housing, the cost may be deducted from the rent you pay your landlord. If the landlord has failed to provide you an essential service, such as running water, you can immediately terminate your lease and find other suitable living arrangements. Even though you as a tenant have sole possession of the rental property, there are certain times when your landlord will need to enter the property and he has the right to do so. First, if you call your landlord and ask him to make a repair, you have given him permission to enter the property to make that repair. If you request that a repair be made, it is always best that you and the landlord set up a specific time to do the work if possible. Second, he can enter the property if he is there to make other required repairs. It is your duty as a tenant to make the property available to the landlord to make such repairs. However, your landlord is required to give you at least 48 hours notice that he will be entering your residence. This notice might be mailed to you or posted on your door. Third, your landlord can enter your residence without permission or notice in an emergency situation. As a tenant, you are generally required to stay on the property that you rent. If you are going to be away from the property for a period of time, it is best to notify your landlord in writing of your absence. This way, your landlord will have notice that you have not abandoned the property, but are just on vacation, for example. The length of time a tenant is away before the rental property is considered abandoned varies by lease agreements, but is usually some period of time longer than 1 week. If your landlord has no notice that you will be away for a period of time, he may think that you have abandoned the property, which allows him to remove and dispose of your belongings, change the locks, and rent to another tenant. A court can also determine whether you have abandoned the property or not. Courts look at your actions rather than your intentions when determining whether or not you have abandoned. So, if you don't give notice to your landlord and stay gone for a month, a court could determine that you have abandoned the property regardless of your intention to return home after your vacation. This video covered the basic rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants. This information was about residential rental relationships only. If you work for your landlord and are receiving a rent discount, this video may not apply to you. If you need additional assistance, contact an attorney or your local legal aid office for advice.